So my name's Glenda Cox, and very briefly, I saw some familiar faces, or names rather, and so welcome everyone, those who know me and have perhaps been to some other workshop before. To those I don't know, great to meet you. And yeah, so today, I just want to get around my slides. So just very quickly, this is me. I work in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, which is based in CHED. So we run these SILT events. So the SILT events is, I'm part of that department. I'm in kind of a staff development cluster. So I do a lot of teaching, postgraduate teaching in course and curriculum design, and I supervise students. I have a number of other projects I'll tell you about as I go along. So I do kind of normal academic work, but my passion is for open education, and I've been working in open education since 2010. Various networks, various research projects over the years, including my PhD that focused on sharing open education resources. And you will see, and hopefully if you didn't know, now you will know that we have something called Open UCT, which makes UCT quite special and unique. So many universities overseas will have a repository of some sort where they can maybe put open access journals, open access articles rather, but very seldom is there one place where everything is, and that's what Open UCT. It's a great place for anybody to come to and search for open materials at UCT. So it's quite unique, and it's an amazing enabler for you as academics to be able to have a version of your work and share it openly on Open UCT. Also, again, briefly, we've had this long history of open education at UCT. This is not a new thing. Lots of research projects that we've built on over the years, working across faculties and outside of UCT, internationally, and also very closely with the library, who manage Open UCT. So although Open UCT was developed as part of a grant funding process, it now is permanently housed in the library. So there's a picture of me and my two very special colleagues, Michelle and Bianca, and we work on a project that is about open textbooks. So if anyone's interested in finding out more about open textbooks, more of the detail of open textbooks, you're welcome to get hold of me. And we have this project was also externally funded by the Canadian IDRC, but recently has become an institutionally funded initiative. So Bianca and Michelle have permanent jobs at UCT, and we are in a wonderful position where we can actually support the creation of open education resources and open textbooks as part of our work. So what would you like to learn from this webinar? I did ask you to sort of pop something in the chat. I haven't seen all the comments, but just very generally, I can see things around copyright rules. I can see things around finding and using OER, how to attribute others, attribute yourself, understand copyright a lot better, how to create OERs, and the sort of differences of Creative Commons licenses and what they mean and what exactly they are in relation to openness. So I'm hoping that all of these issues will be addressed. And if we do have some time at the end, then if there's other questions, can certainly go ahead. Right, so that's where we're at now. These images, by the way, if you go to the Creative Commons site, there are some beautiful images there that you can share in your work, all openly licensed, but I'll talk about that a little later. Right, so I'm going to explain a little bit about open education, move on to copyright, and then into Creative Commons. So sometimes openness is a little confusing, or the word open rather is kind of misused and bandied about, and people get a bit confused between. So what is open access? Open access is more about research in open journals. A a different part of under the umbrella of the open movement, but not the same as open education resources, which are really focused on teaching and learning materials. And there are other opens. So open source software we will know about. So people often say, oh, it's open source for educational materials. Technically, open source is a term that belongs to the software domain. So all these opens, and it's just important for us to be very clear that the enabling aspect of all of this openness was open licenses. And way back when people started to share more materials and the internet was blossoming and there was lots of materials out there and people were going, oh no, I know, how do I protect my copyright now? It's so easy. And that's where open licenses came in the 1990s, first with open source software and then later on teaching materials. So the open licensing is the key aspect to remember. Open education, as I said, is a kind of a broader movement that looks at, different types of activities that can be open. So I could have, for example, my research open. I could have blogs on the work that I do. I could share all my conference presentations and other workshops. So it's kind of a whole ambit of different open potential things that one can do. And then just to get to the sort of technical, there are lots of definitions of open education resources, but just the big thing is about that it's out there in the public domain or released under an intellectual property license that permits the user to use the materials in a certain way. And specifically for us today, we're going to be focusing on Creative Commons, which is the most used open license. Right, I spoke about OpenUCT and the exciting aspect of when you're looking for a place to share, and go and have a look to see what your colleagues have shared as well. Some fantastic resources there. So people talk about open education practices. This is kind of what I was talking about. It's not only open educational materials, but all of you are here now from slightly different perspectives, but I'm guessing that most of you are quite keen to think about sharing more and how you do this. And because of that, you're an open education practitioner. So it starts with practice that enables open education resources to be made. So now you have a new title for yourselves. This is what I was talking about with this kind of ambit of open educational practices. And there's just an example of Catherine Cronin, who shares extensively. So hopefully that's kind of a little bit on the open. The title of this was Open Content. So open content and open education resources are often used quite interchangeably, very similar kind of thing. So why is it important now? Why are we interested in this? Why does it feel like, for me and my work, the institutions recognizing it more? We have more people interested in finding out more about it, and it's just more globally accepted. So at the moment in higher education, there's a very big need for accessible and free resources. This links in with fees must fall discussions. So not only are fees expensive, but textbooks are also very expensive. Open education matters because you can share materials, not reinvent the wheel. Very importantly, for our context, if we're thinking about curriculum review and curriculum change, open education gives us an avenue to have local case studies and local examples that are relevant to us here at UCT or South Africa or in the Global South. That's very important for our students to be able to access and understand these materials. It encourages us to reconsider our teaching and learning. And importantly, colleagues and students can become co-creators in this process. So there's no doubt that COVID-19 was a bit of a catalyst, and there's been a number of studies where, because everything was locked down, people were looking for resources online and were looking for free resources online. And so there was definitely a sort of a push towards greater use and greater understanding of what OER are. And so that's the kind of the kind of backdrop and the kind of reasons for it in a very sort of basic way about why it's important. And I could go on about a number of other reasons on different levels, whether it's sort of institutional visibility or your personal visibility. And I can talk about personal experience where everything that I do is under an open license, including articles in open access journals. That's a choice that I've made because I feel I must walk my talk. But it has really enabled my career and networks, and I'm very happy with my decision going forward. So these are choices that we make along the way. So what is this all about? Copyright and Creative Commons licensing. And I must say that one of the things that is probably the elephant in the room and nobody's mentioned it is of course artificial intelligence. And I can't answer all your questions right now about that, but this is also something where this idea of copyright becomes tricky. So firstly, for all of us at UCT, this is important and useful, is to go and pop into the IP policy at UCT. And what happens at UCT, which only happens at, I think, it's 5 or 6 of the 26, 27, I've lost count, public institutions. So there's 5 here. I'm not sure if one of the new institutions has also got this policy. But what happens at UCT, which is great, is UCT automatically assigns the authors the copyright. So your course materials are yours to do as you want with them. You can put your Creative Commons license on and decide how you want people to use your materials. So this is a wonderful freedom that other university lecturers don't necessarily have. They can get around it in some ways by asking permissions and so on, but UCT has an open access policy as well that also promotes sharing of knowledge and creation of open education resources. So we've got a lot of this kind of policy backup. It doesn't always help us so much because not everybody reads the policy in the first place. But just to say, if you are thinking about going down this kind of avenue, we've got this great support that's present, this expertise in SILTs, the repository, the library, and supporting policies along the way. So, and legal advice if you really need it, because I am not a lawyer. So, but we do have a whole legal team in IP law who can help very sophisticated questions. So what is copyright? This is the definition for those who were not sure. I'm sure you are all pretty sure, but it's exclusive rights given to creators and authors to protect their original works. Okay, and it's been around, I imagine, for a few hundred years. And this all rights reserved means that if you come across a book or any materials or materials online or articles that have an all right reserve on it, you may not reproduce that work. As a lecturer or an academic in an educational institute, you are covered by fair use or fair dealing, depending on where you are in the world, where you are allowed to use a lot of all rights reserved content in your teaching for classroom use. And for classroom use is the key phrase here. If it's not through your institution, then you need to ask permission to be able to use it. And sometimes people will give you permission to use it. Sometimes you have to pay royalties. And very importantly, you may not use this on the internet. You may not take somebody's stuff and use it on the internet. A very important thing to remember is if the minute you put something on the internet, so you have, let's say, a slide deck from a conference that you would like to share on a website, for example, or have on your department website, and you pop it up there and you don't specify a license, it is immediately under full copyright. People don't realize this, so you go online and you see, oh, there's nothing written here about copyright or anything. I'm sure I could just take it, which is completely incorrect. So it's very important to keep this in mind. And not everybody actually realizes that you're infringing copyright if you're taking that. So this is the importance of good practice in copyright and Creative Commons, and really understanding where you want to share, where you want full copyright, and so on. So copyright is also a little fuzzy. So we were talking about this idea of fair use in the classroom. So we are sometimes in the classroom, but most of the time we're online, and we have Amatuba where we share resources, and we have various other places online where we share materials. And so it becomes more and more difficult to protect copyright and make sure that the right person is attributed for the work, because people think, well, I'm just going to take it and just use it because it's so easy to do. And so with this problem, Creative Commons realized that we needed to have a solution. And so as academics, we've always been kind of protected by fair use and fair dealing. We still are to a certain extent, but also it's more important now to be thinking about legal and copyright and IP. And this was from 2016. But this is, still so important for us to be thinking about this, especially now in light of artificial intelligence and where that is going to fit in with the legal and the copyright and so on. So worthwhile for everyone to think about it. And so the way the story goes is, in the 90s, there was, you either had public domain, which means you put your resource out there and you don't even get any kind of accreditation. It's totally free, totally free. So you don't mind, anyone can have it, anyone can do whatever they want with it. They can change it, they can make money out of it, they can do whatever they want to do with it. And then there was copyright, and there was nothing in between. And so what Creative Commons did, and also this GNU, which is the open source software license, what they did was they positioned themselves between public domain and copyright. So a very important thing to remember is, if you are using an open license like a Creative Commons license, it is not giving your copyright away. The simplest license requires attribution. So public domain, no attribution. It's out there, you don't care what happens to it. But that whole cluster of some rights reserved is about your attribution, and about how you allow other people to use your work, whatever that might be, whether it's research or teaching materials or an open textbook and so on. So that's the kind of explanation that's very important. People often say to me, oh, if I put an open license on it, I'm throwing my intellectual property away. Not at all, actually. It's actually really protecting it by giving the user a kind of way of going, oh, okay, I need to acknowledge, or whatever the specific things are. I'll go into the detail, a little bit of detail now in a minute. So yeah, the most important thing is you're still protecting your copyright unless you want to do public domain, and then you don't require any kind of attribution. Great, so Creative Commons licensing. So this is they're based in the US, and it's an NGO, but they've managed to raise like enormous amounts of funding. And yeah, internationally recognized. I think formed around 2002, so they've got this massive long history of working with lawyers to make these licenses and to protect the licenses. And initially, and still, I think there's specific ones for different countries, but they now also have an international license. So you can use that and not have a specific license for a country. Right, that's enough there. And just this kind of slide around the fact that there are, and this is not a recent slide, I must tell you, but it's still on their website because I thought it would be updated, but over 2 billion works. Really interesting to go and look here, especially if you're thinking about creating your own open education resources, or thinking of creating slides that you would like to share and you would like specific images or background music or all kinds of different things. You can get access to these materials here. There are lots of ways of searching for open materials, but Creative Commons is a great way to start. So it has all these things and it also shows you how to share your work. And I'll go into that in a few minutes. So these are the licenses. So there's 6 of them. And initially, when one looks at them, it's kind of, oh, well, it looks a little confusing. But yeah, hopefully, and this is something that I probably can't teach you right now. If we were face to face, we'd probably have a little half-an-hour session exploring the different licenses and how they can be combined and put together. And I've got a link on another slide to a little game that you can play, online game that helps you to think about how licenses can be put together. And so in a nutshell, the top license is CC BY, it's called, which is Creative Commons Attribution. It's the most, besides obviously public domain, which is I've talked about, it's the most commonly used and the most open license. So if somebody uses a slide of mine that has CC BY on it, it means all they have to do is acknowledge Glenda Cox, and that's it really. Sometimes if it's an image or slides, perhaps they want to put a link into a slide share or so on to link back to me. But really just attribution, but you're getting the attribution. Then the next one in the row is about share alike. So when this movement started, there was a lot of obviously advocacy work, and people were very adamant that if you're going to share something, people must share it alike. So if you're going to share CC BY, I want the next person who's going to share it in the same way with a share alike license. But that has some limitations, because when you're thinking about what license you want to apply, it all depends on your context and your materials. So you might have materials that you feel very strongly that should not be changed. So you want to put a very conservative license on your materials because they are health sciences materials. And they're materials that cannot be split up or used. So my personal opinion is I don't say share alike is necessarily the best solution. I would rather do CC BY. Then the third line down is no derivatives. So I will share this slideshow with you, but if I put a no derivatives on it, you may not change it. So you have to use my whole slideshow, just like this. Very useful for things that make sense in continuum. You might have materials that you really don't want to have cut up into pieces. Depending on your needs, this could be something that you want to choose. The next one down is non-commercial. And what that means is you can use my slides in whatever way you want, but you may not repackage them and then put them into a journal, and that costs money, or a textbook that costs money. So this was also a kind of important kind of philosophical argument that if it's free, people mustn't be making money out of it. It's very important, and that's why you see below it, there's also a share-alike option. But there are lots of little nuances around this, because sometimes you might be sharing materials, let's say, with a community organization somewhere in rural Northern Cape, and you're sharing posters with information, and you say non-commercial. That's not really fair, because they're going to have to print, and they're probably going to have to ask for a certain amount of fee to actually produce those articles. So there's a little nuancing, and those are the kinds of things that the lawyers are very good at putting clauses in to protect you when you're thinking about this. So the next one is second from the bottom, attribution, non-commercial, share-alike, as I mentioned. And then probably the most conservative license, but also if it's necessary for your context. Attribution, you must attribute, but you must not change, and you must not make money. Those are the licenses. So not too many, I hope, and not too confusing. Yeah, so just to kind of separate out the sort of key concepts. So not making money non-commercial. We could get a little rand sign there instead of $1. No derivatives, it must be equal, must be the same. By is to attribute, and share alike, which is copy left, is where you must do whatever the license has already been specified. So those are the kind of key little differences. And as a creator, you have a choice. You can decide what works best for you. So just to kind of repeat that kind of little diagram I had earlier with the public domain, which is sometimes called, is a little PD like that, or like a copyright with cross through. Those are all for public domain. And then as you can see how the licenses kind of fit along the continuum to all rights reserved. So I hope that's clear that all of those middle ones, all of the Creative Commons ones, are still attributing. So one of the things that, if I had you kind of together, I would have maybe been thinking about this, is what I said with the exercise, is let's say you are starting to build some slides for your next lecture or a new lecture that you're building, and you are thinking, like, I want to share these at the end with a Creative Commons license, because I know that this particular lecture will be useful for people, who are teaching the same topic in Africa, throughout the world. The concepts, I really want to get these concepts out and shareable and so on. So you're thinking about developing these from scratch as a Creative Commons. And then what you do is you think you really would like to, in the slides, you want to have a little video clip. And in the slide, you would also like to have a series of models. But when you start looking at the licenses, so you search open, and the materials are open, but you come across that the video is actually a CC BY NC ND. So very limiting. But you want to use that with a CC BY. So what you need to do is to figure out, and this is what this particular slide is how the licenses work together, because you need to respect everyone's license. And what often happens is you, in the end, have to put the most conservative license on, because you have used other people's materials who have used a conservative license. So this is something that you need to, maybe if that really doesn't work for you, then you can throw out that particular material, create your own, or find another. So there is a little bit of kind of trying to figure out how these all fit together. And this slide is a great opportunity to revise and look at different options and licenses, and then also to practice this little game, which we won't have time now because I really would like to have time for questions at the end. This is the link. So yeah, and it's like it always looks like a little card, like a game of patience, and you choose the licenses. So that will give you a bit of practice so that you can see how the licenses work together. So yeah, so one of the questions was, you know, so I've got a resource. So now, so maybe you're not creating from scratch. You've got these teaching materials. You're really thinking you would like to make them open education resources and make them openly available. What do? You made them, you know, you've added to them over the years, over several years. You haven't always noticed the copyright on some things, especially like the images. You don't know really who did it. And so this is kind of a little methodology here. So you might have an image that you could recreate, a model or something that you have used from a textbook that's, you know, a copyright textbook, but you want to use a similar thing. You can recreate that model. You can replace with something similar, or find an alternative. You can ask permission, and yeah, sometimes you don't hear anything, but there are also a lot of cases where authors will say, well, you're using this for teaching materials and open education materials. That's fine, as long as you attribute me. And then you can reconsider if the resource is really necessary. So if it is that resource that is really difficult, they're really tight licensing, and you don't want to do that, you can maybe see if you can find something else. So this is a little kind of plan of looking at your resource, and then there's this link at the bottom here, which is really nice to think about. It's nice and clear about becoming an author of open education resources. So big thing, as I said, is pictures and graphics. So you need to look at texts as well, but you need to make sure that whatever you've chosen, you need to make sure that you are looking at the copyright that's been chosen. And that's why it is just often much easier to start a search, a Google search or a Creative Commons search, looking specifically for open education materials. Just becomes a lot easier. Okay, best practices for attribution. There are different ways of doing this. You can attribute right underneath an image, which I think I did earlier. I also have a slide way at the end of all of these slides where I've acknowledged people that have also put together some of these slides that I've adapted. This is not high stakes materials, and these materials obviously are available all over. But yeah, so just you can think about how you do that. So either on the page, sometimes if you're doing a very creative slideshow where you just want beautiful images or whatever, then you can acknowledge at the end. So best practice is title, author, source, or a link, and then the license. So that's the kind of best practice of doing this. Oh, this is just a nice, very nice site, like write it down. Well, I'm going to give you the slides anyway. Unsplash. It's got fantastic photos in it. So this is just an example of a site. And then when you click on so for example, I went onto this slide and asked about the copyright. It said to me, so they actually set it up really nicely for you, that you need to attribute this person, and there's a little link and everything there for you. So it's a great site for being able to do these things. So I've talked about doing this, and it's fantastically easy. So I remember sort of when I first started doing work with Creative Commons, I pictured myself writing like an email to Creative Commons and having to fill in all these forms and I don't know what else, but actually it's really not that difficult. And on their website, they actually take you through the process of doing this, which is great. So it even kind of explains things along the way if you are not quite sure exactly what one of the licenses may be. But it's as simple as adding the CC BY. So you will have seen on my slides, I've got that little block, the little image of the CC BY, and that is sufficient. So if you're using my work, you should be saying by Glenda Cox and then looking at the different license with the different slides. So it's easy. And this is kind of the process. So you go onto the Creative Commons website. As I said, well worth a visit because it's got a lot of materials there. And you go onto the thing that says share your work, and it starts asking you questions. So the first question is, will you allow adaptions of your work, okay, to be shared? Yes or no? And then yes, as long as others share alike. Will you allow commercial uses of your work? So those are your first two questions. So I've said here, yes, adaptions, and yes, commercial. And so I have selected an attribution CC BY license, okay? And it's 4.0 international license, which I think is the latest license that you can get. But they also give you other options. So besides having the little block or something like that, you can also get, if you fill in all this information here, you can get a nice kind of readable, this license CC BY with acknowledgement to Glenda Cox, or the copyright held with Glenda Cox, slide deck, whatever it is, and a date or whatever. You can actually add more information to make it kind of look more official. And then they also have for websites a machine readable version where people can actually click on that and will go and see what the license is all about. So they give you these kind of options depending on what your materials are and how you want to work with them. So here's that information I was just saying, copyright and Creative Commons by Glenda Cox, licensed under that license. Or you can get that code as well. That's kind of what it looks like. And yeah, you can put that wherever you want to put that. So typically, if you had an open textbook, for example, you would have that information in the copyright information where everything is about how this work was published and so on. Okay, similar kind of concept. Great. So it's 22:01. I'm just so I'm hoping that you've learned what you want to learn, but we've got time now to actually have a discussion, which I thought was quite important. So sharing openly is a change in the way you're doing things. The great thing is if you're starting a new course or developing new materials, you can be thinking all the time about openness. It's actually easier than going back into your developed, loved materials that you've been using that have, a whole bunch of third-party copyright infringement in them, and you have to go through and take things out. That's not so nice. So it does require a change in practice. And as I said, I think the fact that most of you are here, there's definitely a driver to be an open education practitioner, and that sharing knowledge is something that is important. I'm hoping that you've understood the Creative Commons licenses. You can always have a little bit of kind of questions. And then this interesting sort of quote, why should I share my educational content, to how can I stay in control of the process of my educational content being shared? And I find that Creative Commons license is really empowering, because it does help you to do that, and enables sharing at the same time. And there's also some really nice resources there and links there. So what to consider when you create teaching materials? So images or other people's materials, make sure they're Creative Commons licensed, and consider how you share online, so that it can be licensed for use by others. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. So this slide deck goes on to a whole bunch of, I think, very useful repositories and OER collections. So I will share that with you. But for now, I think let's have some questions and things that haven't been dealt with yet. So I can run through some of the questions if no one has a question at the moment. So Nicholas is saying what the differences are between open education resources and CC BY material. So I'm hoping, Nick, that that's clear, that they're the same thing. And an open education resource will be licensed with a Creative Commons license. That's what makes it open, but not always CC BY. As you saw, it can be CC BY no derivatives, it could be no commercial. There are those 6 variances of how you would license them, but yes, it's the open license that makes the material an open education resource. Nicole, I'm hoping that you've got some tips now on creating OERs or contributing them. Did I cover that, Nicole? I'm going to give a thumbs up. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay, I just was worried there. Okay, great, that's great. Melissa was asking about copyright rules. So I didn't go into too much of copyright rules. I did a little. If what I did was not enough, you can always get hold of me, and I will put you in touch with people in IP law if you need to understand more, or we could have a more specific conversation. I've also got a physical booklet as well, and lots of other resources that I can give you if you come and see me in Silt. Is that okay, Melissa? Any questions? Okay, Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca. Nice to see you here. Good. I think we've covered most of the questions. Rebecca, do you have any additional questions that I didn't manage to get to?
I'm of course wondering about copyright on music, both scores and recordings. But as far as I know, for scores, there's an increasing Creative Commons repository.
Yes.
I think the problem will be recordings, but there too, I'll just scratch around a bit.
Yes. So again, it will be about looking for open materials. If you are looking specifically for open materials, making your own scores and materials open. And there will be probably quite specific advice around music and other creative materials that are more complicated, I imagine, than open education materials that we've been talking about, that we have ownership over, and so on. So I think creative works have slightly different nuances. Yeah. But also, as you know, copyright also expires. So I think after 50 years. So a lot of older materials available to use. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, I think I've got okay. Property reference course notes, got it. Okay. Thomas, if one uses materials with a more restrictive license, is it possible to reference that license for the pertinent material without it dictating the license for your entire publication? Yes, it is. It depends on how you are embedding the material. So remember at the end of so that wouldn't work if I had sort of slides that had some more restrictive licenses in it, because by licensing it Creative Commons, you are putting your own name on it and using other people's works. So you want to take the more conservative approach to respect other people's views. So there isn't an easy way of getting around that. And that's why sometimes you do that in a separate cluster or share it in a separate way, so that you're not, tied down with all of your materials by that restrictive license. So there's a bit of kind of fiddling that you need to do around that. Okay, Melissa's noted. Any other questions? Were anyone surprised by anything? Was that too much information too quickly? Hope not. Any other questions? You're welcome to put them in the chat. And then I'm interested if we can just, before we close, we've got a few minutes. If you want to just add into the chat, which I think is probably the most comfortable place, is just to add, I'm going to share open materials. I have open materials that I have already shared. I need help, more help than this short seminar. It's just nice for me to sort of see who you are a little bit more. So if you can all just pop that into the chat, and then I can keep a note of that. So I'm very interested to see whether it's easy to have an explanation like this and be able to go off and create these materials, or easy or difficult. So thanks, if you could do that. Nadine, I haven't shared it yet. I will send it to Max, to Silt Events, and Max will share it with everyone on the sign-up list. So thanks, Nadine. Great, thanks, Max. Good, okay, so just in closing, if you can. Okay, great, Thomas says he has. And Thomas, you're planning on sharing more, is that why you're here? Great, okay. So we have some great examples from the Open Textbook Project, which I didn't go into at all. Maybe it would be interesting for people, and I should actually do that at some point, of different models of how people have created open materials and open textbooks, and how creative they've been in including colleagues and including students in the process of creating those materials. That's something very interesting for me at the moment, is this idea of students as partners, and how we can bring students into creating open education resources where they get attribution as well for being part of the process, and they create materials that are very relevant to them. So that's kind of my future area of interest, and maybe I should do a SILT session on that in the future. Great. So Nadine is busy with OER and Dickie says thank you. And if ever anyone pops into SILT, give me a shout, and I've got a little booklet on open on Creative Commons. I know it sounds very old-fashioned, but we printed them quite a while ago, and sometimes it's quite useful to have it next to you if you're referring to all of these things while you're doing your work. So you're welcome to send me an email, and you can collect a few of those. Spread the word. And like I just see Nicole is typing, and Rebecca. Thanks. Okay, great. Okay, good. Thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully I will meet more of you face to face in the future. And please do contact me. Real open door policy. Obviously, open is what I love. So if we can help in any way, myself and my colleagues, we're very keen to do that and promote open at UCT. Okay, so thanks. If that's all, I think, yeah, we can call it a day and you can all go off to your next meetings, I imagine. Thank you very much for attending.